This is Kevin Conroy, the voice of Batman. And you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 345 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, our other host, my good brother, Liam. Liam, we have turned the calendar page. I don't know if it felt the same way for you, but January felt like it was about 6 years long. February, despite being the shortest month, felt like it was about 8 years long. We finally made it to March, if you're listening at the original time of recording, of course. If not, maybe it's, I don't know, October 2049 or something like that. 50 years from now, whenever now is, who knows? Regardless, we turned the calendar page here at the original time of recording, and we are moving on to a different series within the DCAU. We had a fun time last month with our second Meta Brawl episode of all time. If you didn't get a chance to check that one out, head back in the archives on your favorite podcast app or DCAUreview.com to check out that one. We had Lobo versus Steel in a Meta Brawl. And then, Liam, the rest of the month we spent taking a look back at World's Finest, a.k.a. the birth of the DCAU. But there would be no reviews to continue if there wasn't last week's episode. But this character also ends up showing up later on. And it's about time we revisited Static with another fun episode this week.
Absolutely. And this is the Force Awakensing to, I think, one of Static's classic episodes, which is, of course, the Great Static in Africa, which we reviewed quite a long time ago. This week we have Out of Africa. We reverse it. It's slightly different because this time the characters who Virgil visited on the Great Continent of Africa last year are coming to visit him in Dakota this time. So a lot to get to with this week's episode, with the return of Anansi and some others.
That's right, Liam. Before we do that, we will, of course, remind you that this week's episode, of course, we will feature our official IMDb synopsis for this week in just a moment. But before we do, we'll take a second to remind you, if you'd like to support the podcast, one of the best ways to do so is to check out buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. That's buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. If you head over there, you can check out, there are a couple of different ways to support the podcast, including one-time support, monthly support, or annual support. And if you become a supporting member of the podcast, we have 3 different levels at which you can support us. The top tier, which is our Super Friend tier, is the one that comes with the most perks, but every level comes with a variety of different perks if you support us and join us as a monthly member. Check those out over at buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. My favorite perk that we've instituted that's been really, really fun to utilize since the beginning of this year is if you're on that Super Friend tier, we give you the opportunity to ask a specific question about the episode that we're reviewing. And we do once again have a question of the week to answer later on from one of our supporters. So we'll cover that in a little bit. But if you want to join our support list, if you want to get your question in, we invite you to head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review and check out your opportunity to support the podcast today. And of course, this episode, Liam, before you get into the IMDb synopsis, originally debuted on the Kids WB here in the United States on January the 31st, 2004, meaning we just celebrated the 21-year anniversary of this episode's debut. It's old enough to drink. It's old enough to, in every state in the United States at this point. So, old enough to vote in the United States if it so chose to. So, I feel old. Let's get that IMDb synopsis.
That's right. So this is the synopsis for Out of Africa, which was written by Dwayne McDuffie, directed by Vic Dalchell, apologies, music by Max Gauss, and animation by Dong Wu. And that synopsis reads as such. Anansi comes to Dakota to get a rare spider artifact from Dr. Enokie, who has brought it to the Dakota History Museum as part of an African artifact exhibit. Try saying African artifact exhibit 3 times fast, huh?
That's why they pay you the big bucks to read the official IMDb synopsis, Liam. That's why I don't touch those things. Not a bad synopsis, all things considered, I would say. Also, great pronunciation of the Dr. Inokie's name. That one, if you're not careful, could trip you up a little bit. But yes, I would say not a bad way. Maybe a couple things left out there, but a perfectly passable grade. I would give that probably a B. Nothing infactual, at least, listed there. We will get into our own synopsis, though, Liam, as we start things off. Just as the IMDb synopsis alludes to, we see Sharon and Virgil are at the museum helping set up this brand new West African exhibit, and specifically showcasing some of the gold that has been brought over from Africa. And they're assisting Dr. Inokie. It's funny. They're putting up this banner, and we get the classic bit where Virgil gets to use his powers behind Sharon's back as they're trying to hang this banner up. And he finds an excuse to get her to walk away just long enough for him to use his powers to hang the banner that he was struggling with. But as we go, and Dr. Inokie invites Virgil and Sharon to take a look at the items that are about to go on display at the museum exhibit. He shows them several different jewels, including one very interesting spider-shaped jewel. And just as the doctor is describing and kind of talking about the different artifacts, he gets a phone call from a mysterious voice on the other end that mentions that he will be there shortly. The doctor asks him to hurry up because he seems to be a little bit panicked. Just as he's saying this, he looks on one of the security cameras and notices a shadow move across the screen. The doctor seems very, very upset at this point. We see him grab the spider jewel off of the display and drop it into a coat pocket that he hands to Sharon, and quickly ushers Virgil and her out of the museum, borderline being rude to them, slamming the doors as they're still talking to him. And the doctor then heads his way back into his office inside the museum as Virgil and Sharon just kind of share their disdain as well as confusion as why the doctor was being so mean and ushered them out so quickly.
Sharon! It is late. You must go now.
You're being kind of rough there, aren't you, Doc?
I can handle this myself, little brother. Come on. If he wants us to go, we'll go. But you could be a little more polite about it, Doctor, especially after all my work.
Looking for me, I presume. I am Onini, the Python. Save yourself a great deal of trouble and hand it over to me. I do not know what you are talking about.
The more I think about it, the madder I get. He even shut the door in my face.
I've never seen him act that way. Seemed like he was upset about something. Maybe scared.
You taking his side?
I'm not. I'm just saying, oh, man. I left my backpack at the museum.
Do what you want. I'm not going back there and getting my head bit off.
Wouldn't you know it? As we cut back to the museum, Dr. Inokie is attacked by this human snake hybrid man, also known as, is it Onini? Onini? Is that how they pronounced it?
I believe so, yes.
Onini. Yeah, there's a couple, as you'll see, there's a couple of different animal-human hybrids, and you can call it ignorance, but the accents that the voice actors are using sometimes makes it sound like
I was going to say, not everyone says it the same way.
Yeah, people have different pronunciations of the name, so sounds a little bit differently each time. Regardless, this human snake hybrid that complete with a snake torso and snake tail, no legs, but and he has arms that are also like eyeless snake heads that are coming out. Anyway, he's attacking the doctor, demanding that the doctor tell him where the jewel is. The doctor plays dumb and pretends like he doesn't know what he's talking about. And just as the Snake Man is attempting to squeeze the information out of the doctor, Static shows up just in time to save the day. Fisticuffs, of course, escalate very quickly as Static begins to do some fighting. Thankfully, Gear also arrives very quickly after that to assist Static. However, as things are wont to do, the doctor is inadvertently electrocuted when Static electrocutes the snake, and the snake has the good doctor wrapped up in its tail. So some collateral damage there. The doctor is knocked unconscious. Gear attempts to do his best to try and take on the snake, but then a second giant bug man appears, and this giant bug man, let me get this name. It's Umoboro, I think. Maboro. Yeah, I wrote that one down phonetically in my notes. It's Maboro. Maboro, who is best described as just a giant hornet man thing, flies around, and he also begins attacking Static and Gear. So they have their hands full at this point, and just when it seems that they may have gotten the upper hand with these animal-human hybrids, they bring down the house. Literally, the roof starts caving in thanks to the magical powers of Maburo, and the doctor is put in immediate danger as it looks like the roof is going to collapse on top of him. Static has to do that thing where he uses his powers in a way that we probably have never seen him use them before, and he creates this like gigantic electro force field, just enough to like protect the doctor from being crushed but not from being hurt. Like he's still injured in some form or fashion by the roof collapsing on him. So this allows I was going to save this for animation and visuals, but it is one of the funniest. I had to watch it 3 times, but the funniest sequences as Static and Gear are kind of sitting there trying to tend to the doctor. Behind Gear, over his shoulder, you see the Snake Man and the Hornet Man just dart at a supersonic speed out of the museum. So they have made their way out. Obviously coming up empty-handed, not recovering the jewel, but they did unfortunately hurt the doctor in the process. So later on, as they're outside, the doctor's getting loaded up into an ambulance, and we see Static and Gear kind of discussing what their strategy is going to be. So Gear sets off, heads back to his house because he's grounded. And I thought that this would actually play a role later on in the episode. And I feel like maybe a scene was cut that would have made this a little bit funnier. But we learned that Gear was grounded because he had some chemicals explode in his parents' garage.
I don't get it. Near as the police can tell, nothing was stolen.
Maybe we scared him off.
Yeah, they looked terrified.
I am sorry, my friend. I was too slow to save you. But perhaps there is still time to save the spider.
Yeah, I think those guys have the right idea. I'm dangerously close to curfew.
You wouldn't have a curfew if you hadn't blown up your garage.
Those compounds were theoretically stable.
You go ahead. I want to see if I can find any more clues.
You got it.
I thought they would never leave.
Anansi, what are you doing here?
I have come for your assistance, young friend.
Anything. How can I help?
Break into that museum.
Thankfully, standing by in the shadows is a familiar face and voice. It is none other than Anansi the Spider, who, for whatever reason, for 8 seconds, puts on the disguise of an overweight security guard to blend in. As the police and the ambulance drive away, Static is left there by himself, but Anansi announces himself to Static and tells him that he needs his help, and he's glad that he ran into Static at that point. Anansi then explains to Static exactly from his position what he believes is going on, and what could be the source of this attack against the doctor.
That's right. So at that point, we kind of cut away to Sharon back at the house, still very upset at being sort of blown off by the doctor at the start of the episode, feeling not being aware that he was trying to protect her and Virgil by ushering them out the door. She notices that in her jacket pocket is this strange spider charm. And when she looks at it in her hand, she sees that it kind of begins to flicker and change. And before she can really sort of figure out what it is she's holding, Mr. Hawkins barges into her room to inform her that the dishes haven't been done and that she had better get them done, as it's her night to do it, and he will not take any excuses, as she's been shirking her responsibilities lately. So as he leaves, she realizes that the spider charm sort of flickered invisible in her hand when her father walked in, and then became visible again. So she begins to understand that she has some sort of magic spider charm thing, one of those. So so we get this kind of parallel thing where she heads to Richie's, of all places, to do some investigating of her own, and meanwhile Static and Anansi are on the trail as well, as we see that Sharon and Richie are sort of a little bit argumentative with each other, but she shows him the spider, and more importantly, she shows him what this charm can do, which, or at least what it seems to be able to do, which is conjure up anything she can imagine, as she illustrates by, of all things, a llama showing up in Richie's bedroom. So they decide to do some research, and as Richie discovers what exactly the origins of the spider are, instead of hearing Richie recount these origins, we instead cut over to Anansi and Static, who are discussing it, and Anansi using his own image creation powers. He's like one of those AI bots, but he does it for real. So
he steal other people's artwork.
That's correct. He actually conjures it up himself.
Once, there was a very clever spider named Kwaku Anansi who wished to have the power of storytelling. The Sky King, who owned all things, made a bargain with Kwaku. Bring me 3 evildoers, and in return, I will give you that power. So brave Kwaku set out to bring the Sky King what he asked for. Kwaku tricked Mboro, the stinging hornet, into a gourd. Kwaku tricked Onyini, the bullying python, and tied him to a stick. Kwaku tricked Osebo, the greedy leopard, who fell into a pit. The Sky King was pleased. He granted the spider his request. And with the power of storytelling came the power of illusion.
Is the gold spider Kwaku?
No, Kwaku made the gold spider to hold his powers, and in each generation passed those powers from one hero to the next.
So he conjures up sort of a magic slideshow to show Virgil the origins of this charm. And as Sharon and Richie also discover this information, in comes crashing Osebo, like the Kool-Aid Man. If Richie's parents didn't like the explosions in the garage, they're definitely not going to like the Kool-Aid Man sized hole in the side of their house. But
that's what I thought. That's why I thought there was going to be a callback to this at the end of the episode. Spoiler: there isn't, but we knew that there would be. Once we find out that the illusions they're illusions, Michael. They're not, they're not actual manifestations of what Sharon is conjuring. That there would be some recompense for her at the end of the episode not doing her chores. But I figured the flip side to that would also be Richie getting his chewed out because of the gigantic inexplicable hole in the side of his room. But we don't get that.
No, absolutely not. And the very real hole made by Osebo as he attacks, and as you mentioned, this is sort of where Sharon realizes that these spells she's casting are not actual conjurings, as you mentioned, but are instead just illusions as she tries to trap him in a cage, and it does quite frankly nothing. So he grabs hold of her. Richie tries to defend her. Of course, he's not in his gear costume. He doesn't do the tried and true superhero thing of always wearing it under your clothes at all times. He's not a never nude with his superhero suit, but he gets knocked out of the giant gaping hole in the roof for his troubles. Though thankfully he has this collapsible bow staff thing that he is able to sort of ride down like a fireman's pole, as he is able to get to safety and then go to suit up his gear. Meanwhile, Osebo does grab hold of Sharon, and though she won't let him have the spider as she makes it go invisible once again, he decides he's going to kidnap her and hold her until she gives it to him. Gear, as he's flying away, pulls out what looks like a label maker, and I think it's supposed to be a tracker, and shoots that onto the helicopter as they fly away. Osebo's got some cash on him, huh? They got a van, they got a helicopter, they got a hideout.
Maybe he's leading those those African prince scams, and that's where he's collecting all his money. We learned that he's a greedy person, and that's why he ultimately got captured by the spider god at the beginning of the story, or at the story of Anansi's origin powers. So I'm gonna go with that as my headcanon. He was leading some of those African prince scams to collect his fortune and scam people out of their money.
I love that. Yes, at that point, we cut back to Static and Anansi, who are discussing what their next move should be, when Static gets a call from the old shock vox from Gear saying that Sharon's been kidnapped. So at that point, Static and Anansi go to the hospital to see Dr. Inoki, which I think is how that's how Static pronounces it, though he is not using the African accent. So, so they go to see him after some amusing things where Anansi has to sort of conjure up a disguise for both of them.
The doctor's going to be under guard. Hope we can convince the police to let us talk to him.
Follow my lead.
You have no idea how happy you just made my pops.
Why do I even bother? Once again, what's the diagnosis?
The disease presents itself as a, mitochondrial conflagration.
Good. Course of treatment?
Well, first we'll check the status of the patient's health insurance, then intubate something.
Interns. Dr. Inoki.
It's you, Anansi?
Are you gonna be okay?
Yes, thanks to you.
And the spider, do you have it?
No, but it is safe. I hid it in my assistant's pocket.
Your assistant?
They make it into his room and ask what's going on and where the charm is, and Dr. Inoki lets him know that he left it with his assistant. And of course, Static instantly realizes that means Sharon must have it. And right then is when the Gear calls on the shock vox to let Virgil and Anansi know that Sharon's been kidnapped and they need to go save her. So that sets up our bombastic final act as our three heroes now unite to go stop Osebo and his other animal friends.
That's right. Yeah. So as we see Static and Gear and Anansi all meet up, I don't know if you mentioned my favorite line of the episode, which we don't get the "I'm not that kind of spider" line in the episode, but once Static and Anansi arrive to meet up with Gear to plan their attack against Osebo, they do manage. He does manage to slip in I thought you were going to swing in on a web. And he says, yes, I get that a lot, which I chuckled at. I thought that was a cute line there. So not quite as good as the original. The sequel is rarely as good, but still a fun little wink and a nod to our other spider heroes that are somewhere out there. But so their plan of attack is to head in and try and upset the chessboard here. But unfortunately, at this point, it appears that Osebo already has the spider, as we already said. So he's able to gain the upper hand very quickly. He's using his own illusions against Anansi. I don't know why Anansi would necessarily fall for them. They don't seem to work very well. Maybe he doesn't have the practice needed to sort of master them. But he creates like duplicates of himself and then immediately gives himself away. And then Anansi, he creates more duplicates of himself, and Anansi just creates duplicates of himself to take on the other duplicates. So it seems to be not working out very well initially for Osebo, but then we do learn that he has not only been using the spider to channel the same power set that Anansi has, but as Anansi mentioned in the storytelling to Static, he's using the spider to drain Anansi's powers from him, making him weaker. And in the meantime, we have our other two villains. We have Momoboro, who's also back in his full form. He's no longer in the middle of the episode. He split up into a billion different tiny hornets to be a spy across the city, and now he's back.
That's how they found Sharon and Richie.
Yeah. That's he was doing reconnaissance from the helicopter, so he split himself into a billion different pieces. Now he's back to his full, incredibly scary sized giant hornet form, and he's flying around shooting his. He's got like lasers that shoot out of his hands for some reason. Like that's part of his power set. And then of course, our other animal friend of is Onini, who's also giving Richie trouble once again. And thankfully Richie is able to overpower him using some like freeze canister. It like shoots out some sort of material that hardens and keeps the guy from moving any further, concrete or something like that. Maybe one of those chemicals that exploded in his parents' garage. I don't know. Meanwhile, Momoboro almost knocks Sharon off. Sharon's in this gigantic cage on top of a platform, of course, and he pushes the cage off to try and not only, I guess, get rid of her, but to pull Static away. But Static's able to save her and is able to get the upper hand, eventually creating what I thought was initially a giant hammer. It kind of looks like a giant hammer. There's like a piece of machinery that he uses, but I think it's just like a giant metal bucket that's turned upside down. I think it would have been funnier if he just smashed the hornet into 1,000 pieces with like a giant hammer, but I'm sure there was probably reasons why they couldn't do that on the children's television show. So he puts this gigantic metal container over it. So a classic way of catching a winged insect, I guess. And then that leaves our final battle as Anansi is incredibly drained, and it appears that Osebo is about to do him in, as he's now incredibly weak. But Anansi has knocked the spider jewel out of Osebo's hands, and as they're both as Anansi is crawling towards it, and Osebo is sort of gloating at the weak state in which Anansi is. Anansi announces that he has one final trick to play and creates one last illusion.
The illusions are more difficult now, aren't they? Perhaps it is because I have been using the spider to drain your powers.
I can still fight.
You are weak.
I am strong enough for one final trick.
Here, kitty, kitty. Talk about your static cling.
Because he's created about 50 different jewels and scattered them across the ground, leading to some major confusion for Osebo, which allows plenty of time for Static to get involved. And he uses the static cling thing to launch Osebo into onto the ceiling and have him stick there as he's able to return to the ground and give the spider back to Anansi. Anansi at that point announces that the spider is home and will never leave his possession again as he makes it disappear. We have a little postscript celebration outside as Sharon is pretty speechless. She seems to be pretty enthralled with Anansi and thanking him. And
I am forever in your debt, dear lady.
It's okay. This was really exciting. I actually had a good time, except
Yes?
I can't help thinking I'm forgetting something.
Oh, don't worry, ma'am. The boy who was with you when you were attacked is just fine. I saw to that.
Thanks, but I don't think that was it. Hello?
Sharon, this is your father. Guess where I am? I'm in the kitchen looking at the dirty dishes. The dishes you're going to be washing every night for the next month.
Oh, yeah. Now I remember.
Mentioning that the dirty dishes are still in the kitchen, and guess what? She's now punished and will be responsible for washing the dishes for the next month. Static is quite happy about hearing this as he gives a little fist pump off to the side, and we fade to black for this week's episode. All right, Liam, where do we sit with this one? It's a good question. We loved the original Static in Africa episode. It's a classic. I think if you listen to our we guest starred on the Watchtower database back maybe 4 years ago or so for one of their anniversary shows. That's somewhere up on their channel from my understanding. And on there, we ranked Static in Africa as one of the best DCAU episodes of all time. Really? So this one had some big shoes to fill, and I'm curious how you felt that it did.
Yeah, it feels like icing to me. Like it tastes it tastes good. It doesn't hurt you, but it doesn't quite have the substance I think the first one did. Certainly, this is just presented, I think, way more as just a straight adventure. It's just all those characters come to Dakota this time, and there's a MacGuffin that they have to go track down, and Sharon has it, and now the villains kidnap Sharon, and they got to save her, and we do some fights with the crazy animal henchmen and stuff, and it's all fun. But obviously, the first episode had this much larger sort of overarching story of Virgil, being a young black kid who had never gotten the chance to go to Africa before, and then meeting this adult black superhero and how much that meant to him, and that whole end of that episode of Anansi sort of imparting on him that Static is that person for kids, can be that person for kids in America that Anansi is to Static. So I think that's it's such a beautiful episode, and it has different layers to it among all the fun action and the wacky animal characters and the allusions to sort of these African folk tales that have been passed down. We still get some of that in this episode, but like I said, I think it's fun, but it's hard to compare it to what is such a masterpiece that the original is,
Yeah, that's exactly kind of how I felt. Not that I didn't enjoy seeing the characters again, but it very much invokes a lot of current modern day, especially I feel like superhero stuff, where it's this is the idea seems exciting at the time. I want to see more of Anansi. I want to see more of his backstory. I want to know more about him. I want to see these other characters. Oh, there's new people, new crazy animal human hybrid things being introduced too. Cool. Awesome. We're expanding his rogues gallery. Awesome. Gear gets to be involved this time. Oh, super cool. But then, as is the case with a lot of follow-up media these days, sequels and prequels and threequels and all of that, sometimes it's just I don't think it could meet the expectations, and I don't think by the end of it you're just kind of I don't know if this was needed. I don't know if we needed this follow-up episode. And again, that's not to say, not to draw the comparison with a lot of modern media that it is overtly bad, or that it's it's a cash grab. I don't think this could ever be accused of that. I think that this, however, is just a case where they're we're in the last season here. This was a well-received episode. This was a fun episode. Let's bring this character back. And it's well, the problem is this character operates on a different continent than our superhero does. So we have to figure out how we're going to get them on the same continent, let alone the same city. All right, so let's bring Anansi back over. So then we kind of have that idea and kind of work backwards from there of we want these two guys to interact again, and then how do we make that happen? So It's fine. I think overall, I don't think that there's nothing bad about it. Maybe this might be the most I've ever seen that I can remember a Sharon episode. Like this focuses a lot on Sharon, and maybe that's why also it feels like we're robbed a little bit because she's the person that gets to wield the spider's power for so long, and
Mm-hmm.
so much of the episode is about her discovering what it is and how it works and why the doctor was being mean to her and all that. So she becomes a little bit of the focus here. So it's not great. It's not horrible though. I didn't think that there was anything bad in the episode, but I just kind of ended up giving it a 5 out of 10 just for score. I think it's fine. I think it's passable. It fits in with any other Saturday morning cartoon as far as your plot line and the bad guys getting their comeuppance at the end and the heroes win. And there's a little bit of comedy with relatable children's thing with being grounded because you didn't do your chores at the end, that you can laugh at. But it doesn't feel like we broke too much ground here. And it felt like, based on that first episode to me, maybe Anansi deserved a little bit better as far as the sequel is concerned.
Yeah, and to make a DCAU analogy, it's a little this is the deep freeze to Static in Africa's Heart of Ice.
Very good.
It's like the first one is so good and so groundbreaking and so much fun. It's kind of a home run in every category, especially the ones that we grade on. And then how do you follow that up? And again, they don't try to make an episode that's quite as emotionally resonant. They try to, again, I think, try to make it just more of a fun sort of caper episode. Like you said, you get, Sharon gets the charm, and now it's kind of this race against time because the bad guys kidnap her, and look at these other wacky animal characters that are, again, parts. I know those are as mentioned, also characters from folklore there, but it's just like, it's like we get more of the same as far as the accoutrements, but it doesn't have the same emotional resonance as Anansi's first appearance, to your point. So yeah, like I said, nothing particularly wrong with the episode. It's just it had a hard act to follow, and it didn't quite rise to the occasion. So I ended up settling on a kind of a run of the mill 6 out of 10 for my plot score.
Alrighty, so we're only 1 point apart there, so no disagreements so far. Let's move on to our next category, Liam, which is going to be animation and visuals. And animation services this week provided by Dongwoo. And I think this might be one of the coolest looking episodes thus far that we've covered. I know we've talked a lot about how the animation change, the animation style change really helped the production value of this show and made things feel more at home in the DCAU than it was in those earlier seasons. But I was just thinking as I was watching this, like, I cannot imagine an episode like this in that older season 1, season 2 style, and how awkward everything would have looked, and how low budget it was. Because there's a lot of interesting things here between the character designs, the not only bringing back Osebo, but also Moboro, and then Onini also there, and the way that Onini moves, like I chuckled a couple of times because the top half of him is humanoid, and then the bottom half is 100% snake tail, and he, like, the way that he moves, his upper torso like twists as he's moving through the museum as he's like trying to get to the professor, and like the tail it's very snake-like. It's just very funny though, because you don't think, when you see an actual snake move, it's moving on its belly completely on the ground. It doesn't usually have its head up like that. So the fact that he's swinging his torso back and forth, and there's this one side profile shot of his arms kind of like swinging, it looks like he's doing like calisthenics or something like that, to try and get to the doctor. So there's some really interesting movement that I thought was interesting. I think for Moboro's appearance, he's this giant hornet man or whatever, and for I don't quite get the powers, and it kind of reminded me of like, oh, this just looks like any Saturday morning cartoon. Why does he shoot green lasers out of his hands? But I was actually really impressed by the way that they visualized both the dematerializing and then the materializing, where he breaks up into the kind of hundreds of tiny mini insects and then like reforms as the full-sized insect later on. I thought that was done, as far as what the budget that they're working with here. I thought that looked really interesting. I think overall, there's not like a ton that I was blown away by. I think they did have the opportunity, of course, with Anansi being back, for them to redo the gag of him riding on the underside of Static Saucer, which is great. We get a couple of scenes of that. I thought the storytelling scene also was really pretty fascinating. The way that they kind of visualized that, as initially that Static and Anansi are kind of just standing there, and he just kind of unfurls this gigantic, what looks like a projector screen essentially across the sky. And then ultimately you start to see the visuals of the story as he's telling it to Static. I thought that was really interestingly done as well. So they also point out in the dialogue that despite being a leopard, that Osebo has tiger stripes, and I thought that was funny. I don't know if that was done tongue in cheek or what the point of that was, but I thought that was funny at least, and it made me laugh.
Yeah, it was a funny. Because if you were asking me before this episode started what Osebo was, I would have said tiger. So it was kind of a funny line, even though he doesn't have a mane. So I guess that should be the obvious that he's not a tiger. But yeah, or wait, not a lion. I can't talk tonight.
He's a leopard.
Yes, he's a leopard. Even though he has some tiger-like characteristics, but yes, it's I love all the villain designs. I really like Mboro. I think especially I don't know, giant bug that turns into smaller bugs is a good gag. And so I enjoyed that bit quite a bit. And then Onini, he's got, I mean, his whole body is like a human-sized snake, and then he gets two extra little like snake bitey hands. It's just feels like overkill, but it does make him quite a formidable foe for Static and Gear and Anansi to have to face off with. So yeah, all of the designs are neat. I like seeing like Gear get to mix it in. Obviously Richie wasn't along for the ride on the last Anansi trip, so getting to see the three heroes all team up and how that action has to kind of be paced out a little bit. I know that's something these the people that worked on these shows have talked about over the years. Like the more heroes you have in an episode, the more difficult it can be to space out your action beats, because now you have to keep kind of cutting between what each character's doing and keep everybody kind of involved. So I like that. And the final bit, I do really like the gag of it looks like maybe Osebo has Anansi dead to rights, and then Sharon pushes the cage off and it lands on his tail. I think that's a really good visual gag. It almost feels like a Scooby-Doo bit or something, but I like that being the kind of the onus there. And all the allusions, the flashback sequence or not the origin Anansi sequence, I think is really cool. I think there's a note in the DCAU wiki that Larry Houston did the storyboard artists for that, who worked on this show, and I think also worked on X-Men and a few of the other 90s Marvel shows, and had also worked on Static in Africa previously on some of the flashbacks in that episode. So yeah, there's just the very vibrant colors of that flashback scene, and that original sort of Anansi spider design is really cool and interesting looking. So yeah, I think the character designs more than anything are what stood out to me this week, and as well as some of the illusion gags that Sharon pulls off are fun too.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, the fact that the spider allows its holder to create anything is pretty unique. And I mean, I particularly enjoyed the part that when Osebo shows up to Gear's house, and she's trying to create the illusions, and he's like, she creates this cavern and he walks right through it, like right on top of it. I thought that those were done, or the cage puts him in the cage and he walks right through the bars. I thought that those were done. Those were done because you're bending the laws of like the animation physics at that point, because the character, you're making an illusion in a cartoon, essentially. So yeah, I kind of dug that, the way that they chose to visualize that and execute that. So I think the replicants too is interesting. Even if I question the effectiveness of the gag, I think creating replicants to then have that's always a classic bit that seems to happen when a character gets overpowered, whether it's here or in in the What is Reality episode of Batman the animated series or whatever. The villain's always going to try and make more of himself to outnumber the hero. And then the hero then, for whatever reason, has the ability to replicate himself also. So I liked that little callback there as well. And yeah, ultimately the episode I think is perfectly fine. I didn't think there was necessarily one standout thing other than maybe our character designs and that sequence of Static and Anansi kind of standing there in silhouette watching the sky as the story goes across it. But yeah, I still settled on a solid 7 out of 10 for my score. I think it's fine. I think there's some really good stuff here, but I didn't have one thing that necessarily blew me away. What about you?
Yeah, I gave it the exact same score of 7 out of 10. Yeah, like I said, I think the character designs are all really fun with all our bad guys, and it's fun to see Anansi back. And but yeah, there's not really a standout action sequence that I can really think of. Although again, as mentioned, I really like Gear's label maker tracer gun that he fires off at the helicopter. I was like, that's an interesting shape for that to be. But I also like it because he's a DIY guy, so he might have literally made it out of a label maker or something like that. So it works. It works because it's Gear's device. It's not Batman's or somebody's.
Very true. Good point there. All right, Liam, let's move on to our next category, which is going to be music. And I did not notate when you were saying who was responsible for music this week. Is it our Wolfie Wolf friend?
No, it's Max Gauss, I believe, gets the credit for this one, along with Derek Thornton, who has our season 2 Static theme that still gets pumped in for once in a while. But yeah, I'm going to be honest. I had very little in the way of musical notes here. I think there's a little bit at the start in the museum and when Anansi shows up, but almost no lyrics that I really noticed. And then yeah, I didn't notice a lot of I didn't have much in the music section for my notes, unfortunately.
I had a couple. I was able to, while I was letting you wrap up from watching the episode, I was able to kind of review a couple of things. There's a couple of interesting pieces. There's the only song that I noted that had real thorough lyrics is the scene with Sharon kind of walking about the town using the spider. At first, there's this, what I, an uneducated white man, noted as a Jay-Z ripoff sounding song. It's very much like we took early Jay-Z and we just said, okay, person in the studio, do something like this, and that's what they did. I didn't bother to write down the lyrics, so no rhyme time this week. But yeah, some. It's fine. It's interesting because it kind of fits more old school Static. It kind of works it in there. So it definitely did bring my point up for music as far as including that, because it was old school signature Static music. The rest of the music, though, I think there's a couple of interesting sequences. I think at the beginning with the initial attack at the museum, we have this kind of techno beat sounding music that's doesn't sound necessarily typical Static, but it does fit with, I think, the sequence. It's kind of this frantic sounding music. And then when Anansi shows up. There is a little bit of an Anansi theme. It's just kind of some percussion, maybe with a little bit of woodwind instruments there, very conga drums and African drums sounding, which obviously fits that character well. And then that theme would kind of continue as he shares the story of the history of the spider's powers and how he came to hold the power itself. So we get some more thematic music. And then weirdly, there's like two sequences. There's one, I think it's in the helicopter when Mboro shows back up in the helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end when Osebo is having, I think, a conversation, he's kind of giving his verbal beat down on Anansi. They bring in what sounds like a sitar, like that Middle Eastern Indian instrument that's played. And I was like, okay, all right. I don't know why you would play that, but that's sure. That's a sound that you could bring in here. It's different and it creates a different atmosphere to what's going on. So, there's enough unique stuff here. I feel like that, it certainly helps the episode. I don't know if I had watched this a single time, if I would have picked up on anything other than the percussion that is heavily laid also in that final fight sequence. Also, there's a lot of percussion that's played there in the battle between Static and Gear and Anansi and the animal crew there. But overall, I think it's unique enough and it kind of fits the tone for what they were going through. And obviously, you have this character whose roots are in on the continent of Africa, and so that bringing in that music that kind of reflects that character's history and atmosphere, I think works really well. So I ended up giving music a 7 out of 10. I think it's good. I don't remember hearing we didn't get the classic Static, like he doesn't get a transformation sequence in this episode. He kind of transforms off screen. So we don't get the classic Static transformation sequence song. So maybe a point lower because we don't get the Static theme as much, but overall still pretty solid. What about you?
Yeah, I gave it a 6 out of 10. Nothing really to write home about here. I thought it was it was fine. Like I said, I think I expected a little bit more unique, and to your point, there definitely was some there, but just not enough of a strong theme for Anansi or anything across the episode that I think could have raised it. And again, maybe that comes because a lot of the episode he's either doing some sleuthing with Static and he isn't in action quite as much in this episode. But yeah, it's like I said, nothing wrong with it, but nothing spectacular either.
There we go. All right, Liam, let's take us home with our final category of the day, which is going to be voice acting. We have a lot of characters in this episode doing double and triple duty at times. So we do get a couple of returning and, of course, familiar names, as well as characters that were in that first original Static in Africa episode. So we get them returning as well. Let's go ahead and review this week's voice cast, which, of course, also features a well-known DCAU actor who also has a role currently in the big Marvel movie that's in the theaters.
That's right. So we'll start off with some of the minor players here. So we have Roscoe Lee Brown returning as Dr. Inokie, or Inoki. Also previously, of course, voiced Dr. Wakati in Time Out of Joint.
Mm-hmm. I think using the same voice 100%. Like I saw the character's face. Like maybe that's just his voice, but it's the same voice, and I saw the character from Batman the Animated Series in my brain as I'm listening to the voice of the character in the Static episode.
It's very similar voices. Maybe they're distantly related somehow. We don't know. But yeah, we have him. He was also the voice of the Kingpin on the animated Spider-Man of the 90s.
That's right.
So I think he put some bass in his voice for that one, because he doesn't sound like the Kingpin here, but he sounds much more kind of kindly and grandfatherly here. But nice to have him back here. We do have Michael Jai White returning as Osebo, Spawn himself returning here, and also the voice of Doomsday original for some reason, and in Justice League later on in JLU, even though they put that voice modulation thing on his voice in the second episode. But he's good. He's a good menacing villain, returning for this episode here. I don't know. He's got good gravitas. He gets to, I think he gets to be a little extra menacing because he's, instead of just kind of shaking his fist at the superheroes, he gets to kind of go after a civilian and Sharon, so he gets to be a little extra evil in this one, I think.
Yeah, he does. He's really excited about trying to, like, drive the knife and twist the knife into Anansi as he's got that spider at the end, which ultimately is his undoing. But he does a fine job. He's also really cocky when Sharon thinks she's going to use the spider against him, and he just kind of walks right through the illusions. So he's a little bit cockier. He's a little bit meaner. He's a little bit full of himself, and ultimately, even though it's perfectly played, it's ultimately his undoing. So not that has anything to do with the performance of the voice acting. I think that actually complements the voice acting job by our actor, Mr. Michael J. White.
Absolutely. And then elsewhere, as mentioned, we'll save the big heavy hitters. We do have Kevin Michael Richardson playing both Mr. Hawkins, there to scold Sharon for not doing the dishes, and also providing the menacing voice of Onini. They put some kind of effect on his voice, and he gets the he's doing a lot of slithering, which I think is a good bit to add to it, and he and Static kind of play off of that a little bit. So I enjoyed that role as well. And then we have Michelle Morgan as Sharon. To your point, Cal, this might be the episode where she's gotten the most solo focus. I mean, she's always around, and there's the Rubber Band Man episodes, but that's, even there, she's kind of in the background while the bad guy and the good guy fight in the foreground. So it's interesting having her kind of have her own little, like I said, this sort of wacky misadventure of discovering the gem and thinking it's this magical thing that she's found, and that's gonna be this good luck charm for her, and then immediately getting kidnapped by the villains because of it, because she didn't really understand what she was doing, and all that, and then again kind of coming through in the end to save it. I think she's good. I think she has one of my favorite bits in the episode is when at the end, when she's they're setting up the gag of Mr. Hawkins calling to yell at her about the dishes, and she's like, I feel like there's something I'm forgetting. And Gear goes up. He's like, oh, no, don't worry. Your friend who was with you is totally safe. And she just goes, no, that's not it. like she had not even thought about Richie for a half of a second since all this had gone down. I just thought her delivery, Miss Morgan's delivery on that was good. But yeah, she gets to do a little bit more. She's got some, it's a little bit more comedic at points. And also she gets to, again, kind of be menaced by the bad guys as well. So she gets much more to do than just being sort of the nagging sister that she can be in a lot of these episodes.
Yeah, she usually gets those, like, she's usually reduced to a couple of quips, and as you mentioned, like the nagging, she's designed to be like the relatable mean older sister, right? That seemed to be so prevalent in the 80s and 90s sitcoms. So it's nice that she finally gets to strike out kind of on her own and gets the opportunity, even as she falls into her own sort of mess and draws the ire of her father for not doing her chores. It's nice that for a change that Static isn't like the one that's kind of getting chewed out by his dad for doing something wrong, or for being essentially for being a superhero, even though dad doesn't know it. But she does a great job. I feel like, I think the comedic timing, there's a scene where she has to give like this really deep scream as the cage is falling in that final fight scene. I thought that sounded authentic, really terrifying. So yeah, I think she does a really great job. It's one of the, maybe if not the best that we've covered so far. Definitely one of the top episodes for her as far as performances are concerned for Miss Morgan.
Absolutely. And then we will get before our main heroes, of course, as you alluded to, Cal. We have a DCAU legend and current star of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Carl Lumbly back this week as Anansi the Spider. Of course, currently playing Isaiah Bradley, the secret Captain America he originated in the show that not a lot of people watched, because if they had, he would have gotten an Emmy for it. But and then he's back in the movie. Great to see him on the big screen getting some recognition. But here back on our show, we're always recognizing Carl Lumbly. We've not to be a total hipster about it, but if you're just now discovering what a powerhouse of talent Carl Lumbly is, welcome to the party, pal. We've been here a while, so but yeah, great to hear him back. I love him as Anansi. He's got this very kind of dry and simple, simplistic way almost of speaking as Anansi. He obviously has sort of affecting more of an African accent when he speaks to him, but he's just kind of this very just this like bastion of goodness. It's like it feels like somebody's hugging you when he's talking. Like I don't know. He's such this like ray of sunshine as Anansi, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree. He's like I said, he gets that little redux or remix of the "I'm not Spider-Man" line that I liked, and then or the "I'm not that kind of spider," if you will, kind of line. But he gets that whole sequence where he's talking about the origins of Anansi's powers and that whole African folklore story, which is really, really cool to hear him kind of tell that. And I feel like I could listen to Carl Lumbly, regardless of whether it's with an accent or without an accent, read the phone book, and I'd be perfectly happy. Phone books, kids, used to be this actual physical book that included everybody's phone numbers in it. Just Google it. You'll figure it out, or ask AI. What a phone book was. But yeah, I could listen to him read the dictionary. Gosh, I pick something else. I could listen to him read Google results for hours and I'd be happy. He's really, really great, and obviously gets some really good one-liners here in this episode. And then I think ultimately when he plays the weakened version that's kind of defiant towards Osebo at the end there, to defiant to the end as the hero there, it really, really brings it home. And then when he gets the power back, kind of triumphantly saying that the spider will never leave his possession again. Really like that line too. So yeah, really, really good stuff. Unsurprisingly, from an unsung hero in the DCAU and in the general acting world, perhaps as well.
Absolutely. And then we have our two main heroes, Jason Marsden as Gear/Richie. Again, gets to do a little bit more, has that little kind of comedic beat with Sharon, as mentioned, and then he's in action as Gear throughout the episode. I think that the two best parts for him are what we've already talked about, which is the bit at the end with Sharon where he's like trying to deepen his voice, be like, "No, that young man is totally fine," and she just blows him off. And then the spider line with Anansi is great. And as already mentioned, the line where he's like, "Wait a minute, he's a leopard, but he has stripes." Like he's so confused. Even the smartest guy in the room is confused by that design. So he's got some good funny lines. And then of course the great Phil Lamar pulling double duty as both Mbaro and Static this week. So another good job by our leads here. Again, nothing nearly as emotionally resonant as our first episode featuring Anansi, but hey, it's good fun action, and again, you get to have Phil Lamar and Carl Lumbly teaming up in a different way than maybe we're used to. So that's fun, even if it's not as spectacular as previous episodes.
Yeah, I did what we always do and looked at the separate. That's why we separate the categories, right? Plot may not have been as high as certainly was not as high as our score for Static in Africa, but as far as the voice acting, I'd be shocked if we didn't score it something similar to what I ended up giving my final score, which was a 9 out of 10. So really, really strong. I think we have a lot of great performances across the board. I think Michelle Morgan's performance really brought that score into that upper echelon there, though, because it's very impressive. A lot, like I said, a lot of times she doesn't get much, meat and potatoes type dialogue to deliver. So in this case, having some having some additional things to kind of express and emotion to share. And I was impressed with her ability here 4 seasons in to kind of almost carry an episode for a significant portion. So yeah, real good score, 9 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, absolutely. I gave it just 1 point lower at 8 out of 10. So I also dug it very much. And yeah, to your point, one of the more unique episodes with Morgan getting a much larger starring role than usual.
All right, Liam. Well, that will bring us to our final scores for the episode. So totaling everything up, I end up with a 28 out of 40. What about you?
I believe I'm going to come just 1 point lower at a 27 out of 40 this week.
There you go. So as far as rewatchability here, this one, as far as static episodes go, I think even though it's a little bit of maybe a letdown in the plot, I think because of how important and good that first Anansi episode is, you kind of almost, this is a direct sequel to it. You learn a little bit more about the backstory of Anansi, the secrets of his past and how he came to be, perhaps, if you to put it one way. So maybe you give it 1 thumbs up. I think if you miss it, again, story wise, it doesn't impact things a whole lot. There's not a lot that's changed from beginning to the end of the episode, but it's good, clean fun. And if you're watching through static episodes, if you're like, hey, what's an easy to watch, fun static episode, I'd say, well, have you seen Static in Africa yet? Yeah, how about the sequel? Check out Out of Africa and let me know what you think. That's kind of where I'd land. What about you?
Yeah, I give it like a kind of a lukewarm thumbs up. Certainly not nearly as important as the first episode, but a fun little diversion there. Nothing wrong with it. So doesn't feel super essential, again, because you're not really getting any of those meatier character beats like we got in the first one, but still a bunch of returning characters, and it's the sequel to the more famous episodes, so it'll make a lot of lists of like the Static Shock episode that's a sequel to its greatest episode that nobody remembers. Like there's there will be a comicbook.com article with that title within a couple of years, or whenever the next time Static Shock is up in Google Trend searches, I'm sure.
There you go. All right, Liam. Well, that will begin to wrap us up for this week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget, we love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Where does this sit as far as sequel episodes go? Do you agree with us that's a little bit of a letdown coming out of Static in Africa? Are we being a little too hard on it? Are there things that you appreciated about the episode? Let us know. You can do so, of course, by joining in the conversation on social media, Twitter X, at DCAU Review, or on Instagram at DCAU Review. Of course, you can always comment on Threads. Blue Sky still exists as far as I know. So, yep, give us feedback on there. If you prefer to use one of those channels, we will eventually get there to you. You can also, of course, provide feedback by supporting the podcast and being a monthly or annual podcast supporter. And one of the ways you can give us your feedback and thoughts is commenting on our buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review page. There's an option for you as a member to do so. And of course, we also mentioned at the top when plugging our Buy Me a Coffee site that you can also, if you become one of our top tier supporters, you get the opportunity to ask us a question, which once again, this week, our question of the week comes from Zach. Zach asks, he says, first of all, he was very complimentary in his comment of both Carl Lumbly, Michael J. White, and Roscoe Lee Brown, mentioning how Mr. Brown was great both in voice acting, and offered a rest in peace for him as well. His question is this. So in the DCAU, are Marvel heroes fiction and DC heroes real? He's asking because there's a Spider-Man reference made in each episode that Anansi appeared in. Of course, we talked about that. He in Static in Africa, he says, "I'm not that kind of spider," when Static asks him to shoot him with his web shooters. And then, of course, in this episode,
he does the hand symbol too.
That's right. And then in this episode, we talked about how Richie supposed that he was going to come swinging in on a web, and he says, "I get that a lot." So, what are your thoughts, Liam? Where do Marvel heroes exist in fiction within the DC animated universe?
So to answer this question, I'm going to call upon the bad episode jar and bring up Unity.
Oh no!
Where when Kara is talking to her friend on the bus when she's getting ready to leave Smallville, he brings up an issue of a comic called Spider Power, which is like clearly supposed to be Spider-Man, but it's not Spider-Man.
Interesting.
So I think there is a Spider-Man like character in a comic book, in a popular comic book series, but it is not literally the heroes of the Marvel universe. Similarly to how Static likes Plant Man, but it's not Swamp Thing, who actually also really exists in this world.
Right.
I just remembered Harley Quinn. But yeah, I think for Marvel, when it comes to Marvel, I would say there are Marvel pastiches all throughout the fictional comic books of the DCAU, but I don't think it's literally Peter Parker Spider-Man. That's my official nerdy answer to that absolutely tremendous question.
Yeah, I don't know where I land with this. Obviously, there was the original aired scene of Dan Turpin's funeral in Superman the Animated Series that was attended by a group that certainly looked like the Fantastic Four.
And Nick Fury, I believe.
What's that?
And Nick Fury, I think, is in the credits.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Nick Fury as well. So, you have these like nodes and homages, but there's nothing. I don't know that there's enough overt references to say that the characters that are either referred to in comic books or in perhaps blink and you miss it wink appearances are necessarily supposed to be those characters. It's not the same where they do it in the comics, where you see, we know that there have been appearances in both DC and Marvel over the year where the artist and the editor and the writer will sneak in little cameo appearances by Lois and Clark in a Marvel comic, or Peter Parker shows up in a DC comic or something like that, just as a passing little nod, or it's not really addressed by name. Those characters really don't show up unless it's a explicit crossover, which and thinking about it, with the recent announcement of a new DC Marvel crossover, it's does have the wheels turning here as to what that would look like in animated form. But yeah, I don't think there's enough evidence to say that Spider-Man is who they're specifically referencing. Obviously, it's a meta wink and a nod to us in the real world that know who he's referencing. But I don't know that there's enough evidence to suggest that Marvel comic books exist in the DCAU, and those characters are the fictional versions that they're referencing. So yeah, hard to say. I think it's one of those things that goes either way. If you want them to be fictional characters in a comic book series, sort of like the Justice Guild of America were to Jon Stewart, then maybe that exists. But also remember that the Justice Guild was simply just characters that existed in another universe. So an alternate universe, parallel universe. So explain that one away. Multiverses are so hot right now. So how does that work in answering that question? I don't know, but great question from Zach. You can join Zach and the rest of our supporters. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/DCAU review. And you too can ask us a question as early as next week. Speaking of next week, Liam, we will continue with our static reviews here with the month of March. Let's take a look at what episode we'll be covering next week.
That is right, Cal. And the next episode we're going to be looking at is another Season 4 static adventure. This one is called No Man's an Island, and it seems Static kidnapped against his will and brought to a mysterious island for some sort of scientific experiments. And if that's not bad enough, his cellmate is none other than his old high school bully, Hot Streak. So tempers are going to flare, to say the least, when those two are forced to work together, perhaps, to escape their strange confines.
Gonna look forward to that one. I don't remember seeing that one on the original run, so it'll feel brand new to me, even if I have it. Because if I did see it, it's been decades. So looking forward to reviewing that one with you next week. But until then, I'm Cal.
I'm Liam.
And we hope you'll join us on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.